Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to be here with you halfway through the Feast of Tabernacles. Time flies, doesn't it? Several months ago, we received a call from a young lady back in our home state of West Virginia. And she wanted to know if she could come down and spend the night with us. She wanted to bring a friend. She was en route to Nashville. She was going to Nashville to see Taylor Swift in concert. Now, she was traveling quite a few miles to get there. It's not the one concert a year, but people like Taylor Swift, many of the other famous singers, they tour around the country. And night after night after night after night, they fill large coliseums with people. Fans that come to watch them. If you like country, we've got country. You like pop, we've got pop. You like rock and roll, we've got that. If you're a rapper, I shouldn't include that because I don't think that's music. But people go see it, watch it anyway. You want gospel music, we've got that too. Classical, and many, many others. And each one of those groups have their stars. People who have become famous and overnight become multimillionaires. They had a hit tune. People liked it, so they go out to watch them. And they perform night after night before sold-out audiences. That's one phase of our life and our culture. Other people do other things. Yesterday, all around our country, at all the colleges and universities, hundreds of thousands of people fill the colleges and university stadiums to watch their team. To watch their team play football. Happens every Saturday. People get a kick out of that. They love it. They're very faithful. Now, one of the interesting things about that is that invariably there's always a visitor section. And thousands of people from Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, travel to the various stadiums to watch their team play. There's always a section for the visitors. They're faithful to support their team. I would say in the course of a year, they probably spend thousands of dollars if you buy season tickets, and a lot of people do. But not only the tickets, but they will buy clothing. I have some clothing from my old home state of West Virginia, gold and blue. I wear it. But when you go down here in Tennessee, you see that big orange T all over everything. I turn my back and move away from it, but it's everywhere. And people spend thousands of dollars on that. Sometimes they have whole outfits. Shirts, sweatshirts, blazers, pants, orange tennis shoes. And they have sections that they go to. And they'll put the people dressed in orange in this section, the people in white in that section, orange and white colors. And that's the way it is all over the United States on Saturday afternoon. Then they go to the stadium and spend $6 or $7 on a hot dog and a bag of popcorn. And beer, maybe $10 a bottle. Banners. Every time Tennessee has a football game, we see people, usually on Sundays, come through Sevierville, Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, with these little flags sticking out their window, just blowing in the breeze with the emblem of their college on it. Invariably, they come down here and make it a side trip after the ball game. They will not miss a game. They're faithful to attend those ball games. On Sunday, we do it all again. This time, a whole new group of people. The NFL, the National Football League, Chicago, Los Angeles, Detroit, Denver, Dallas, Houston. They fill those stadiums. People spend hours at the stadium, arriving early in the morning to get a choice spot, to flip down the tailgate and cook their hamburgers and the barbecues and the coolers with the beer. And by the time the game gets started, they're ready to go. Happens all the time, all year long. Go up to Green Bay, Wisconsin in the middle of the winter, and you look out there and you'll see those fans sitting there with those little pieces of cheese sitting on their head, dressed in green and gold, with blankets around them. You can only see a couple of little eyes peeping out, and maybe a nose. Sometimes they have that covered. But they're sitting there, and every time they breathe, you can just see the vapors coming from their mouth. And you can, if you see any moisture around, you probably see icicles. But they're sitting there every Sunday supporting their team. It goes on and on. The National Hockey League. Major League Baseball. We're in the midst now, as I speak, of the World Series. Those stadiums are filled. We have the NBA in the winter and the WNBA. Women's basketball, tennis, golf. One of the biggest players in golf is Tiger Woods. He has a following of thousands. They follow him along on the golf course and hold their breath every time he's going to swing the golf club. NASCAR. Round and round, and they sit there for hours and watch those cars run around that track. And they're having a ball. Give me another beer. How much is a beer? $15. That's good. Give me two. And they're having a good time at NASCAR. And it goes on and on there, too. A whole host of other events. All throughout the country and around the world, too. Soccer is big in some of the countries. And they're good at it, too. These fans, you know where the word fan comes from, fanatic. You'd have to be to participate in some of the activities that you see going on. I've seen young men at football games in the middle of the winter, snowing like crazy with their shirts off, and have one guy would have T-E-N right on a cross, or whatever the name of their college, painted on their chest. And they feel no pain, I guess. Maybe they're in the hospital the next day, but you see it all the time. Fanatical. And then if their team would happen to win a championship, well, they burn the campus down. We're having fun, you know. But we're faithful. We'll support you. You win, we'll burn the place down. They're faithful and loyal. Many of them have established fan clubs. I still see stickers on the windows for Dale Earnhardt. Number 3, was it? They still worship the guy. He was the man. What was it, the Terminator, Exterminator, or Germinator? He was one of those things that people looked up to. I guess he drove with a reckless abandon. And then if you don't like those things, you want to stay home, then you select your TV show, don't you? Well, I've got my shows I've got to watch. And I'm going to arrange my schedule around those shows. We can't wait for them to come on. Some people will stop whatever they're doing in the middle of the day and they'll go watch The Days of My Life. Or As the Stomach Churns. They've got those shows lined out and they've got to watch them. And they're not going to miss them no matter what. Don't speak to me when I'm watching my shows. And thousands anxiously await The Voice. Who's going to win it? The Bachelor. Who's he going to marry? Wringing hands, wondering who's he going to select? Dancing with the Stars. Which one of your favorite fanatical fans, celebrity is going to be out there dancing in very scantily clad clothing, I may add. Now we've got dating naked. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Thankfully for the little blur, I guess you want to know how I know. I just happened to be passing by on the remote. David Smith told me about it. So he told me it took him 30 minutes to get off that station. No, I'm kidding. And of course, the one we all look forward to, American Idol. Thousands vote every night, and they just keep eliminating and eliminating and eliminating. And people sit there, hearts beating fast. I've got to get on there and I've got to text. I've got to get my vote in. I've got to select my idol. And you know, when you boil it all down, it pretty well sums it all up, doesn't it? The American idols, the things that we worship. But one thing you have to agree on, they're faithful, they're loyal to their gods. You have to give them credit for that. They contribute large sums of money. It's expensive to go to ball games. It's expensive to go to concerts. Other people are interested in politics. It's expensive to go to a fundraiser at $15,000 a plate. I couldn't wait to get in one of those, could you? But recently, there was a fundraiser out in California. One of the actresses out there was hosting it for one of the political parties. And she was quoted in saying, "Our president is so handsome." And she contributed thousands of dollars to this man. And she says, Congress ought to give him everything he wants because he's so handsome. I remember years ago, they asked a lady, "Why did you vote for Bill Clinton?" Because he's handsome. And they liked Bill Clinton because he was handsome. These idols establish fads and fashion. You ever hear of pants on the ground? Wonder where that came from. Rappers and tappers and other stars that people follow and look up to and idolize. And if they get up there and their pants are hanging down, the next thing you know, their pants will hang down. They have a tremendous effect on our culture, don't they? And they affect our way of life. Now, back in Revelation 12, verse 9, the Apostle John was inspired to write something. And it's in the Bible for all to see. It says, "And the great dragon was cast out," and it tells you who the dragon is, "that old serpent called the devil and Satan." Now you know the story, don't you, about Satan. Once was Lucifer, made an attempted coup to take over God's throne, was cast back to the earth with 1/3 of the angels. So he came back with a rotten attitude. He came back with a desire to thwart God's plan, to some way make the people that God was working with and planning to bring into his family lose sight of that plan. And he had a lot of devices, a lot of techniques to do that. It says here that using those devices, as you find in other places, we're not ignorant of his devices, he has deceived the whole world. Now, he's even deceived them to believe, particularly if you're a religious person, to believe that they are right and everybody else is wrong. So they think that what they believe, their set of doctrines, is right. And that's how they get around the concept of I'm not deceived. They may be, the Catholics may be, the Methodists may be, the Presbyterians may be, the Baptists may be, the Buddhists may be, the Muslims may be, but my religion, I'm right. And he doesn't care. He's got something for everyone. A smorgasbord. Take it. Take the one you like. Pick it. Choose it. We even advertise for him in our newspapers. Go to the church of your choice tomorrow, which is today. I'm speaking on Sunday. So we see that he's deceived the whole world. And he was cast out into the earth, and his angels with him. So I gave you a scenario of some of the things that take place in our world. Satan, the devil, was put here for a reason in the beginning. His name was Lucifer. You know that. Light bringer. Light means truth. So God had put him down here on this earth for some reason to bring truth and to spread the good news, if you will. Now, undoubtedly, he understood what God is intending to do with human beings. And it probably didn't like that. I'm sure he said, well, what's wrong with us angels? Why can't we rule? Why can't we be in charge? Why can't we be members of your family? So he had to thwart that plan some way. But God had put him down here and gave him responsibility. You see about that in 2 Corinthians 4. In 2 Corinthians 4, let's read verse 1. Therefore, seeing we have this ministry, as we have received mercy, we faint not, but have renounced the hidden things of dishonesty. So Paul says it's not good to be dishonest. You're transgressing God's law. Not walking in craftiness. It's not good to be crafty. It's not good to plot, plan, scheme, plan, be deceitful, nor handling the word of God deceitfully. He says it's wrong if you go out and preach anything contrary to what's in this Bible. And he said, we don't do that, but by manifestation of the truth. He said, that's what we preach, commending ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God. So we make them aware of what's in the Bible. We make them aware of God's truth. That's the job of the ministry, to make the people aware. But our gospel is hidden to them that are lost. If I went to one of those stadiums and cut off the PA system, just as Peyton Manning was in the process of throwing a long pass to Demetrius Thomas, and the announcer was announcing that the ball was in the air, and I cut it off, and I said, I want to tell you about the gospel of Jesus Christ. Do you think they would listen? No, they'd show me the door, wouldn't they? Get that PA system back on. Get that nut out of here. Call for the guys in white coats. So there's people that are lost, and we can't get to them, because it says here, the God of this world has blinded them. He's blinded them through getting them involved in other activities, whether it be a concert, whether it be a NASCAR, whether it be a football game, whether it be a tennis match. It doesn't matter. He's got you going. He's got you worshiping your God. So he's satisfied. He's blinded your minds. And it says it's blinded to them who believe not. So there are some people who just will not believe the gospel because their eyes have been blinded. They cannot possibly see it. They do not believe and will not believe, even though you show them in the Bible. Let's take for an example. One of the concepts of modern religion is that when we die, we go to heaven. And people are expecting that once they die, and how many times do you read in the newspaper, in an obituary, they've died and gone to be with the Lord? In essence, they haven't. But they believe that. They believe that suddenly, after death, that you sprout a set of wings and you wing your way to heaven. Remember the song years ago, Little Jimmy Brown? Little Jimmy Brown has passed away. And he winged his way to heaven. And a lot of people believe that. He's up there with God. So you can read John 3:13 to them, that no man has ascended into the heavens, and they will not believe it. There's something that comes over their eyes that when they read that scripture, they don't see what you see. They just don't get it. And they can't help it because they've been deceived. They've been blinded. by the God of this world. Most people, the ones I described, by the hundreds, by the thousands. I guess there's over 300 million people in this country, 7 billion around the world. Most people are born, they live their lives for the here and now. Many people, their entire life, it revolves around scraping around trying to find food and water, living in little huts if they're fortunate. While we in this country, we have other pursuits, but nonetheless, we seek them, and we seek them diligently. Now, some during the course of their lives reluctantly seek religion. I remember what it was like when I was a small child, attending the Methodist church in a small mining community back in southern West Virginia. I would go to church, and they would send me downstairs for the child's portion. Then when I got older, I'd go upstairs. But then every now and then they had a prayer meeting, or a revival, they called it. Old-fashioned revival. And from time to time, I'd go. And invariably, at the end of that revival, they'd call you to the altar. I'd slink down in that seat and hide as best I could, because I didn't want to go. In fact, I didn't care too much about it, but I did learn the 10 Commandments. They taught me about the books of the Bible. I learned certain stories about David and Goliath and the whale and Jonah. I learned some of those things, but I didn't learn too much. I didn't learn too much that made me change my life. So they reluctantly accept the traditional concepts of God. You know what they mean by that, don't you? When they say, have you met God? And they'll ask him, the man on the street, do you know what God looks like? Can you tell us what he looks like? Can you tell us who he is? Can you tell us where he came from? What can you tell us about God? And the majority of them say, I don't know. I really don't know. Well, do you believe he exists? Yes. Wow. By faith, I just believe he's out there. He's some ethereal concept, but can you tell us why you're here? Can you tell us what God's plan is? Can you tell us, what you're going to do after you die? Well, no, not really. Now, as long as those people attending those groups are young and healthy, they don't really give it much thought. I didn't. I remember standing under a little tree out in my backyard one day, and I was 16 years old. I still remember this. And I started counting. 16, 26, 36, 46, 56, 66. I said, I got 50 years before I'm 66. I got a long time to play and to do what I want to do. And if they aren't too busy, they'll attend church services on Sunday and then rush out to get to the ball games or whatever scheduled activities they have. Maybe shopping, whatever it may be. You pick it. Doesn't matter. But one thing that they do like is they like those holidays. Because during those holidays, it's a fun time. It has been so designed to get the families together and sing carols and to give gifts and to enjoy a meal together. Maybe on Easter, a big fat ham with a pineapple up on it. Or some other creature that God has, or maybe I should say a creature that God has designed for us to eat, maybe like a turkey. But they get together and they like that. And the bright lights are beautiful, and the trees, they can decorate them so nice. And with a cross on the top of it, it almost makes the tree holy. And they feel some emotional feeling inside about all of this. And so year after year after year, they gather. And year after year after year, the stores start posting sales, the Christmas sales right after the Thanksgiving. And they're going to reduce it 20%. We have Black Friday. And after you pay the bill, it's Blue Monday. And it goes on and on and on. But they like and then participate in Christmas. And Satan has such a way that when you stop doing it, you mean you're going to do that to your children? You're not going to give them Christmas? You're going to take that away from those little children, and you feel pretty bad about it. Or they want you to. And then Easter, the story about Christ rising up on Sunday morning in the east, and the Easter bunny, and the beautiful colored eggs. We used to get those eggs. Was it Poss? See, it's funny how you remember things. And we dipped it one side of the egg in one color and the other side in another color, and we'd go out and hide those eggs. And I never could figure out how that had to do with Christ's resurrection. But we did it anyway, because it was traditional. And we participated in Valentine's Day. We had to give our Valentine a card, didn't we? Or flowers, or chocolate candy. Maybe you like cherries covered in chocolate, and roses. If you didn't love your mate, did you? But we never stopped to figure out where all this comes from. I never did. Halloween. Ooh, people dress up, and vampires and witches and goblins and the Walking Dead, and maybe they'll pick their favorite celebrity and dress up like them. I saw Taylor Swift wigs and some of the others that they'll dress up to look like their favorite star, not knowing where Halloween came from. New Year's, make resolutions. It's a good opportunity for everybody to get drunk. St. Patrick's Day and Mardi Gras and on and on and on. It's traditional and people like it, and they indulge in it. And you're not going to take it from them. Many people live their lives and really never know why they were born and what really happens to them when they die. I didn't. When I was young, I was afraid that I was going to die. I was afraid I was going to go to hell. You know, the ever-burning place. And I would burn and burn and burn and burn, and I'd fight the flames, and man, this is never going to stop, you know. And I knew it would burn up. I just heard all the time. So as a little boy, I thought about that. I didn't know. I didn't think I was going to heaven, but I was hoping I would. And Solomon wrote about this stuff. He lived in his time. That was his here and now. And he said everything out there is vanity. It's like the wind. He said one generation comes, they live, they do their thing. Oh, yes, I'm sure they all had their celebrities in those days, people they looked up to. And if you didn't, Caesar would make you look up to him. If you didn't worship them, they'd kill you. So it put a thought in your mind, I better worship this guy. And they didn't mind bowing down. Well, at least most of them didn't anyway. But they'd die, and then here comes another generation. And them little kids would grow up, and Mommy and Daddy had taught them all these different things, so they just followed right along and did the same thing. It's amazing how it works, isn't it? My mom and dad was a Methodist, I was a Methodist. Mom and Dad voted Democratic, I voted Democratic. Everybody in West Virginia voted Democratic. If you voted anything else, you weren't a West Virginian. I wonder how that is now. The gods that they worshiped didn't really help them. It just gave them temporary pleasure. I mean, for the moment. You go to a concert and you hear the music and you get all hyped up and they're smoking dope and popping pills and partying all night. Next day you get a headache. Sometimes if you do too much, you may end up in the hospital, so they're having a good time. Then it's over, and then you get the schedule and say, where are they going to be next time? Where can we follow our star and hear them again? Let's do the same thing over. So they don't really help them with anything. Their idols grow old, and they pass away, and so will they. If you notice, here in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, there are several shops about Elvis Presley. He's got a museum down here. And you can go in and look at all the memorabilia, the outfits that Elvis wore, his jewelry, his Cadillacs. It's all there. They even have shows over here at Memories Theater with Elvis impersonators. But the truth is, Elvis is dead. He died on drugs, swelled up about this big, and his heart just stopped working because that's what their fan did. And many of them worshiped him, throwing parts of their clothing up on the stage. I've seen pictures where they'd show the audience and women would be crying and just going insane over this man, their idol. It's all meaningless. It has no purpose except for the moment. There's no real purpose in it. Their gods didn't change them at all, except in a negative way. Maybe you become a drug addict because you went to some of these places and got high on pot, and somebody gave you a hit of heroin, and the next thing you know, you're hooked. What else can you get from it? Maybe if you go to a gospel show, you'll be enlightened by some of the songs, temporarily. There's one of the leading televangelists that's based his ministry upon encouraging. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. But he can't tell you God's plan of salvation. But the people leave out of there by the thousands after paying for the tickets and after passing the pot several times, bringing in probably hundreds of thousands of dollars at that meeting. And he travels all over the country, but he can't tell you God's plan of salvation, and he doesn't help you change yourself, except when you leave, you feel good. Man, that was encouraging, wasn't it? He's written books, multimillionaire. Throughout history, human nature has been pretty much the same. People lie, they cheat, they steal. I'm not stepping on your toes out there, am I? None of us have done that. Raped, and I hope none of us have done that. Robbed, murdered. And Christ said if you hate somebody in your heart, you've already done that. So don't say, I never murdered anybody. Well, I never shot anybody, but I've hated people. I'd like to hurt them at times. You have to repent of that. And we've had wars ever since the beginning of time. Did Cain not kill Abel? And it's never stopped because somebody comes in power and he wants to control other people's lives and to dictate how they should live their lives. Nebuchadnezzar said, fall down and worship me at the sound of this psaltery. And they did, most of them. That's the way they do. But one thing we have to admit, they serve their gods, whatever it was, diligently and fervently and faithfully. They were faithful up to the end. I've known people that attended church every Sunday. I've known them when they were young, and I knew them through their life because now I'm older and I can see people. They were stubborn when they were little. They were stubborn when I went to grade school with them, and they died stubborn. Never changed. Their personality stayed the same, if not getting worse as you get older. Because the older you get, the more stubborn you get, the more set you are in your ways. I've known people from a young age were alcoholics, and they died with liver cancer. I had a friend who used to spend many nights with me. I'd go to his house, and we always had to ask his dad if he could stay. And his dad was one of these guys that, when he got drunk, was a sloppy drunk. I remember going in his house at times, there'd be dishes broken in the floor where he'd been throwing them. His wife was slithered away in the corner, and he was a ranting, raving maniac. But he and my father were good friends. They worked in the coal mines together. So when my friend and I went in, I had to ask him if he could stay all night with me. He messed with me a little bit. I don't know, he said. He was so drunk, slobber was running out both sides of his mouth. But I kept on playing his game, and well, are you going to let him go? And after a while, yeah, go on. Well, you know, you would have thought that that friend of mine would have hated that with all of his might. But when he got up to an adult, he did the same thing. He's dead now. He's younger than I am. But he drank himself to death. And so did a couple of other brothers in the same family. Typical. People develop habits, and they won't change. They won't change. They can't change. Now, we read in 2 Corinthians 4:4 that Satan deceived them that believe not. They didn't believe. They won't believe. They're on the side of a cigarette pack. It says this may cause cancer. And it will. My father, from a very young age, began smoking Camels. He worked in the coal mines and was proud of it, working right up in the face when all that dust was blowing right back in his face. At the age of 49, he developed tuberculosis and died. But up until the time that he died, even though he will say he switched to Salem's and would remove the nicotine through those little filters. And I think he thought that would help him. But it says right on the back, could cause cancer. But Dad didn't, I don't think at that time they even warned him. I don't think at that time maybe they didn't even know. But it happened. And he wouldn't have quit anyway. He just couldn't, because he'd done it all of his life. But one thing about Dad, he did start reading this Bible, and he began to come into the knowledge of the truth. He never was baptized, but he told my wife. And she shared that information with him. And I'm standing here today, and she is too, because of that. Funny how things work out. So here I am today, speaking to a group of people, not unbelievers, not non-believers, but believers. That's wonderful. People that believe. You believe the gospel of Christ, don't you? You believe the good news that Christ is coming back to this earth, that he's going to establish his kingdom. I believe it. You believe it. You believe that he exists. If somebody asks you, what's your God look like? What would you tell them? Have you ever seen him? Does he ever talk to you? I hope not. Not in so many words. He's talked to you through this book. But one thing that we did, and one thing that you've done, when you came into the knowledge that God removed those blinders from your eyes, and don't think for one moment that you found the church. You didn't. He called you, sent you a special invitation. He knew your name, probably from the time you were born, maybe even before that. Had he not known me, I would not have been here today, because my life was reckless and I did things I shouldn't have survived. But I'm here. But we learned this. You learn to prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. Do you know where that scripture is? You don't need to tell me. 1 Thessalonians. Oh yeah, you do remember, don't you? And you decided you were going to open your Bible and you were going to prove certain things. One of the things you had to prove, does God exist? Is he real? There was a movie out not long ago, God is Dead. My little granddaughter went to see it, and she came back and told us a little bit about it. My wife and I watched it. It was about a philosophy instructor who made his class sign a form at the beginning of the class that God is dead. And all the students signed it, but one. He wouldn't do it. Now, I'm sure he was a nominal Christian, but he believed enough to the fact that he wouldn't sign that. And so the professor says, prove it. Well, if you would be in that classroom, you would already been prepared. You would be able to tell them that God is the creator. And you would tell them, look around you. Do you see the vast universe? Do you see the sun, the moon, the stars, the earth? Do you see the trees, as Mr. Smith elaborated on? Do you see all this stuff? Where did it come from? It didn't just happen. There wasn't a great explosion out there in space. Until God created it, there wasn't even anything out there to explode. So we learned that God is the creator. Has to be. Second thing, we learned that life can only come from life. The law of biogenesis. So the Bible says that he breathed the breath of life into Adam and he became a living soul. And God established a reproduction system so that all the little children after that had to have life. And he started that life in Adam. Cut off the air supply and see what happens. You're going to die, and I will die. So life comes from life. And all these living creatures out there, God created them and put life in them. Temporary life. The third thing, we know that our lives have to be sustained. God created us, flesh and blood, and every day we have to eat. Oh, you can go a little time without eating, but eventually if you don't eat and you don't drink water, you're going to die. But he provided all the stuff that we needed to give us food, all kinds of varieties, fruits, vegetables, meats, all this wonderful things. Plums, peaches, pears, watermelons, cucumbers. I can't eat cucumbers, but some of you do. And all these wonderful things. God sustains us. If it wasn't for God, this is the only planet in the universe that has life on it. And God set it up that way. You're breathing, aren't you? You're breathing oxygen. And God provides that for us. Design. You know, the mind of man is unbelievable. These intelligent scientists will take this little monkey that walks along all humped over and dragging his little hands on the ground, and then they will draw little stages along the way. Now, this is the first one, this is the second one, and gradually it begins to stand up on its feet erect. And they say, now you see how it evolved. I have a question for them. I wonder if that little one-celled creature evolved to the point, I wonder which came first, the male or the female that evolved. And it probably took millions of years, if, you know, in their it doesn't matter because time is insignificant to them. But I wonder which came first. And then it decided, hey, I can't reproduce without the other. And then they had to start evolving again, didn't they? Now, that to me is just unbelievable how anybody can believe that. But you see, that little monkey or orangutan or that little gorilla, and God's created all of them different sizes, they all have a spinal cord run up the back. And all of them stands on bones, you know, a skeletal system. And they have some apparatus for breathing, taking oxygen into the lungs. Wouldn't it make sense that if a master painter painted certain pictures, a lot of times you can almost tell who the painter is by the design, by their style, by the way they paint? Well, of course. So we have learned that God is a master designer. If you went out into space and you stepped out onto the moon, as our astronauts did, if you didn't have something to hold you down, what would happen? You'd be whisked off into space because gravity is out there. The only place that they have gravity is here. And gravity was a law that God created. We read in the book of James, God is the lawgiver. And he made all the laws. Cause and effect is a law. Murphy's Law, I believe, is a law. I don't think God created that. Man did, but anything can go wrong, it will go wrong, and that's not true. But God created all these different laws. Oh, yes, spiritual laws, but physical laws as well. You ask Mr. Taylor if he's out there working on a tractor and drops a screwdriver, where's it going to roll? right up under the middle, right, where you can't reach it from either side. There's laws that are going to take place. Now, the sixth proof of God's existence is prophecies being fulfilled. Now, do you think the people out there that's sitting in a stadium today watching the Denver Broncos play somebody, do you think they understand what's going on in the Middle East or in the European Union? Do they have any concept of Sharia law, as we heard the other day? No. The only thing they know is something's wrong. Something's different than it was when they were children. But they don't know what it is. They think maybe it's global warming or whatever the politicians tell them to blame for the situations. But we are seeing prophecy fulfilled right before our very eyes. And we recognize what it is. We know what Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21 says. We understand the prophecies of Daniel, the 70 weeks prophecy. We understand those things, don't we? And we know what to look for because our Savior told us, watch. Watch ye always and be prepared. For you don't know the day and hour that I'm coming back. So you be prepared. That's what he told them. And finally answered prayer. He doesn't answer all of our prayers, but he answers some. Sitting in the back of the room is living proof. 2011, my wife like to died. Mr. Shelton and I fasted and prayed, and I saw immediate change. I saw he started getting better. I know prayer is answered, and you do too. Many of you have been healed. Many of you have had situations to work out. The other day, my son called me. He said, Dad, they're going to fire me from a job. I've been there 21 years. He said, I'm worried. I said, we'll pray about it. Well, we did pray about it, asked several other people to pray about it. He did go down and met his boss, and instead of firing him, they transferred him to another position, a less stressful position. He doesn't know it yet, but it worked out better for him. In the long run, he's had high blood pressure problems, and he'll be much better off. So, you see, these 7 proofs are indisputable. God does exist, and you believe that, or you wouldn't be here today. I believe that. Let me give you a few facts about God. You already know them, but God's a family, consisting right now of the Father and the Son. God is eternal, existed forever. Where did he come from? He didn't come from anywhere. He's always existed. He's immutable, meaning he's unchangeable. He's the same forever. If he tells you something, you can count on it. He's invisible. You can't see him, but you can look at the work of his hands, and you know that he's there. He's incomprehensible. And you are unable to comprehend the fullness of God. You can't explain the human eye. You can't explain the human ear, the heart. You can't explain a tree that functions so well, and the various fruits and vegetables. You can't explain that. It's there, created by God. Omniscient, all-knowing, all-knowledge. There's not a math equation that God doesn't know. All the chemicals are there. He created them, so he understands chemistry, trigonometry. He understands all that. Omnipresent. You can't go anywhere. David said, like Mr. Smith said, you go out to the universities out there, go down the grave. He's even in the grave. David thought maybe he could hide down in the grave. No, he's down there too. You can't get away from him. He's holy, which means spiritually perfect. Holy. Righteous, omnipotent, faithful, true, merciful, love, very patient, very kind, never rude, never seeks his own, always trying to help you and help me. What do they need? What can I do to help these poor people to get into my kingdom? This is the God that we worship. This God is real. He's not some ethereal concept, as I said earlier. He's not some figment of somebody's imagination. This God exists. This God is here today. He's here all through the feast. You don't see him, but he's here. We have proven God's plan of salvation from Passover to the last great day. You've proven that. You're here keeping the feast, which is part of God's plan. We've proven that we can be a part of His family. We have proven that we can inherit eternal life. Far greater promise than winning a ball game or seeing your favorite celebrity at a concert. We read in Exodus 20, verse 1, and God spoke all these words, saying, I'm the Lord your God. I am the Lord your God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt, house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. No other gods. Sermonette, we heard about money. I elaborate on some other gods that fans fanatically worship. But the Bible tells us in Deuteronomy 13, verses 1 through 4, that we ought to worship the Lord thy God with all of our hearts, all of our minds, and of all of our being. This great God called you, and He called me. He invited you to learn about Him. He did not call the majority of the people in this world. He lets them worship their gods. But He is a jealous God. He knows that there is no other way to obtain salvation except through Him and His Son, Jesus Christ. He even gave His life for us. He inspired this book for our instruction. He opened our minds so that we could learn about Him, His laws, and His plans. I've said all this for one reason, to lead up to this point. Back in Genesis, the 2nd chapter, Genesis 2, after God had renewed the face of the earth, created Adam and Eve, instructed them in their way of life, we read in verse 1, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day God ended His work which He had made, and He rested on the 7th day from all His work which He had made. That's called the Sabbath. In a 7-day week, that's the day that comes at the end of the week. And God blessed that day, the 7th day, and sanctified it, set it apart. Did we not say that God is unchangeable? He doesn't change that day and will not change that day. But He sanctified it because in that He rested by setting an example from all His work which God created and made. On that day, on that special day, God put His presence in it, in that day. Now in Matthew 18 and verse 20, it says this, when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, in other words, to worship Him, truly worship Him, the true God, when you're gathered to worship Him, not some ethereal concept, not some figment of man's imagination, when you gather, at least 2 or 3 of you, sometimes if it's just one and you're worshiping God, He'll be there too. But I want you to imagine something. There's this master chef. I mean, this guy can cook. And he's preparing this fabulous meal. He's worked diligently preparing the salad, preparing the appetizers, preparing the drinks, preparing the main course, preparing the desserts. He's worked for hours preparing that meal. And He invites you to come in. I mean, He's put a lot of time in on this. A lot of effort. And you don't come. You don't show up. And He's standing there with all that food. Maybe spiritual food. And you miss it. You missed out on that. So why would anyone that believes, blessed are those who believe, miss an opportunity to fellowship with that great God. When he says, I'll be there, and is, put his presence in it every single Sabbath, every single holy day, every single festival. He's there, waiting, coming early, staying late, waiting on his people that he invited to come in. Come on in and enjoy this feast that I prepared for you today. And God's ministers spent hours, sometimes weeks, preparing those meals. I drove to Massachusetts one time, my wife and I, to do a public Bible study. One man showed up. And he didn't come to hear the word. He came to use us and manipulate him to get him into the country. Not a soul was there. We gave him the meal anyway. Christ said in Matthew 7, verse 21 through 33, he says, why in the world do you call me Lord, Lord? Why do you say, I know God? Why do you say, I know God exists? I've proven that God exists. I've seen the handiwork of his hands. And you don't do what I tell you to. Why do you do that, he says. Why? He says, I love you. I want you to be in my family. I want to nourish you. I want to provide this food for you, this nourishment. I want you to grow in knowledge and grace. I want you to become mature adults. I want you to go to the fullness and stature of my Son, Jesus Christ. He says, become me perfect as my Father is perfect. He says, I want you to put on my divine nature and become divine. I want you to mortify the deeds of your flesh. I want you to rule with me on my throne. I want you there. I called you. I knew you. I gave my Son for you. I'm willing to work with you. Why don't you do what I tell you to? He said, I gave you a manual. I gave you this instruction manual, how to live your life, how to conduct your marriages, how to raise your children, how to overcome certain weaknesses and flaws that you have. I gave you all that information. I even gave you examples in the Old Testament and told you, look what they did and don't do it. I sent apostles and instruction. I wrote this last New Testament for you. I gave you all this information. He says, do you study it? Do you actually apply it? It's not the hearers, but the doers, he said, through James. He said, I really love you guys. I really want you to be in my family. He said, I even give you a Feast of Tabernacles to get a foretaste of what it's going to be like. Even though you're in the flesh, one of these days you're going to be in the spirit. We've had lessons on how to lead, what it's going to be like, what we need to be doing to prepare for it. So God knows that we exist, and we know that he exists. But he certainly wants us to do as he tells us to do. Now we've got to finish up by going to Hebrews, the 12th chapter. Hebrews 12. Hebrews 12, verse 18. You know, the Apostle Paul was having trouble dealing with a group of people that had been called, invited by God to be members of the family. But they weren't satisfied with it. No, they wanted to go back to that old ritualistic system. They wanted to sacrifice animals. They wanted to go to the temple. They wanted to see the high priest. They wanted to involve themselves in all those rituals. In verse 18, Paul told them this. He says, You are not come to the mount that might be touched and that burn with fire and are under blackness and darkness and tempest. You didn't come to Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb. No, he didn't. He said back there they had the sound of the trumpet, the voice of the words, which voice they heard, entreated that the word should not be spoken to them anymore. They didn't even want to hear his voice. They wanted Moses to listen for them. But they could not endure that which was commanded. No, they weren't satisfied with what they'd been given. They didn't want God in their lives and eventually rejected him. And if so much as a beast touch the mountain, it shall be stoned or thrust through with a dart. Verse 22. No, he says, you didn't go back there. You're not under that old covenant. You're under a new covenant. You have come to Mount Zion, the church of the living God. That's where you are. You were invited. You were revealed this information about this great God. You've come to heavenly Jerusalem and to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn, the church of God. That's where you are, to spirits of just men being made perfect. That's you. That's where you are. That's where you're sitting. You come to the church of the living God, the real church, the one true church, the only church of God. This God is our hope. I'm not afraid of dying anymore, because I know the next moment I'm going to see something that I've been wanting to see for a long time. I hope, and that's my hope, and I believe, because I know I'm trying to do what's right. He's given me purpose. He's given you purpose, real purpose in our lives. We really know why we're here, don't we? Now, if those people that are in that Coliseum out there today are cheering for their players, and they're traveling around to all these different concerts, faithful to support them, do you not think, with what we've been given and what we know, that we should be even more diligent and more faithful than they? Because you have help. You have God's Holy Spirit. So it is our responsibility to remind you of things that you already know, to encourage you in your Christian life. But you must do your part. You must continue to pray, to study, to fast, to meditate. And when Christ comes to visit us, let's make sure that if he prepares a meal, that we are there to eat it.